Good morning, everybody. So my name is Davide Rodogno. I teach here at the Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies, and I will moderate this panel entitled, as you can see, Global Peace in a Polarized World, How to Revive Ethics in International Relations. Now, allow me to introduce our distinguished panelists, Melissa Park, Executive Director of ICAN, former Australian Minister for International Development, Corinne Momal-Magnan, at my right, Executive Director of the Kofi Annan Foundation here in Geneva, Hind bint Abdul Raham Al-Muftah, she's permanent representative of Qatar to the United Nations Office at Geneva, and Miroslav Cerar, Professor of Faculty of Law, University of Ljubljana, and former Prime Minister of Slovenia. As a policy dialogue event, we really aim to have a dynamic and engaging conversation with our panelists, offering substantial reflections and solution-oriented recommendations. Let me tell you a little bit about the modus procedendi, what is going to happen next. I will ask the four panelists three vast, broad questions, and deliberately so. They will reply to each of them, one after the other, for 2 or 3 minutes maximum, and then I will let the panelists have a conversation on each of these questions for a few minutes, and then I will move to the second and third questions. And then we will have enough time to, in the end, to open the floor for question and answers, as explained before by my colleague. I remind all of you that the title of our panel is Global Peace in a Polarized World, How to Revive Ethics in International Relations. And my first question is really broad, vast, and in a way simple and difficult at the same time. And since I was born in a completely different era, in a different century, where everybody kept saying that the world was very polarized, I just wanted to hear you on the difference between yesterday and today, and what would be your definition of peace? What is the difference between peace and global peace? And if you think that this is an ideal that we should strive for, that will never be achieved, but we have to fight for, it's worth fighting for, engaging for, or if this is something that can really be achieved. Corinne, I will start with you, and then I will reverse the order for the second question. Please.
I come from the same era as you do, Davide, I think. And I remember the polarized world, and I can tell you it didn't feel as dangerous or as fragmented as it is today. So I think in this very room, a few months ago, Filippo Grandi gave what is known as the Kofi Annan Geneva Peace Address, which is an annual address. And he started, he's the High Commissioner for Refugees, of course, and he started his address by saying, we live again in a time of war. So I think we are defined now, our era today is defined by war. It is the highest number of conflicts around the world since the end of World War II, and a quarter of humanity lives in a conflict affected country. So I think we have to take just a moment, a pause, and realize that, I mean, for people like us, we may have grown up in a polarized world, but we grew up also believing that we were overcoming war, that war was mostly something of the past, and it may have been very naive. So we now are right in the middle of a time of war, and these are conflicts that are more severe in terms of civilian death than many in the past. They are longer conflicts, and they are waged in a way that shames us all, especially since we just commemorated last week the 75th anniversary of the Geneva Conventions. But the way that conflicts are waged today make a mockery of the Geneva Convention. So I'm not a gloomy person at all, by the way. I'm quite an optimistic person normally, but I think we have to really face reality that this is, yes, a polarized world, but it is mostly a fragmented, violent, and unruly world.
Miro.
Well, first, I would like to thank you for the invitation. Then about the notion of peace, maybe I would say that it is, of course, an ideal which cannot be reached in our lives in this world, but maybe in transcendence, yes, but this is another story, more philosophical, spiritual. I can say that externally, peace actually means absence of violence, absence of physical conflict, of wars. But internally, it is a state of mind. So even if you have peace at the external level, and we are not at peace with ourselves, if we are, let's say, if we live in fear, if we have other conflicts within ourselves, we are not living in true peace. So it is very important to work on both levels, of course, and we will be talking more about this external level today. Secondly, I would like to say that if you have such a noble goal like peace, which is a clean goal, you must also employ clean methods, clean tools, so to say, to take the very clean path toward this goal, if you want really to keep it like that. Because if you take a muddy road, then you will bring some mud to the goal, and the peace will transform into something else. Maybe for some time you will reach some peaceful situation, but then something worse will follow definitely. So in my view, it is very important that we do not think in terms of fighting for peace. I mean, sometimes, of course, we fight. We do all we can. We strive for peace in all ways we can. But physical fighting is not something that can bring lasting peace. It is a wrong approach. And this is why it is so important that world leaders of all kinds, not just political leaders, but also others who have influence and impact on the people, on the world population, should learn about this more. And this is why education, not just for children and youth, is so important. We all must educate ourselves with more knowledge, with more holistic knowledge about these issues, because only if we understand that peace can be, let's say, in a relative way, achieved more successfully and broadly, we have to be less violent. We have to learn how to listen to others, how to have more dialogue, how to nevertheless even step back a little bit to allow for space, which would bring more harmony, because peace basically is harmony. Okay, I will stop here now.
Okay, thank you. Lisa?
Thank you. To me, peace is a child in Gaza being able to go to sleep with a full belly, looking forward to the future, and without having a fear that they and their entire family will be wiped out in a bomb on their house. It is every child being free of war and the scourge of nuclear annihilation. In this time of increased confrontation, militarization and proliferation, where the risk of use of nuclear weapons has never been higher, it's reminding me of what Einstein said when he was asked, but what would be the weapons of World War III? He said, I don't know, but the weapons of World War IV will be sticks and stones. In 1947, Einstein and his fellow atomic scientists, including Oppenheimer, established the Doomsday Clock, an annual assessment by scientists about the proximity of humanity to annihilation. This year, they set the hands of the Doomsday Clock at 90 seconds to midnight, the closest we've ever been to global catastrophe, based on the twin existential threats of firstly nuclear weapons and secondly the environment crisis. So this is an issue for the collective security of humanity. Even the P5 of the Security Council, all nuclear armed states, acknowledged in 2022 that a nuclear war can never be won and must never be fought. Yet, in an astounding failure of leadership and ethics, they cling on to their nuclear weapons and they promote the false message that these weapons of mass destruction are keeping us safe and secure when they manifestly are endangering all of us. The second thing I want to say about peace is that, similar to Miroslav's view, is that peace is about understanding that everything is connected, that people, animals, all of nature are connected, and that there's a natural balance that must be respected. That what we do to others, we ultimately do to ourselves. And this is something that Indigenous peoples around the world have always understood. And tragically, they are the ones who have been the primary victims of more than 2,000 nuclear weapons tests around the world, of which successive generations are still suffering the catastrophic health and environmental consequences. Nuclear weapons are the only devices ever created by humans that have the capacity to destroy all complex life on Earth. It's no accident that the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has said that nuclear weapons must be eliminated, that his #1 recommendation in his new agenda for peace is the elimination of nuclear weapons. The elimination of nuclear weapons must be seen as an essential part of respecting and protecting the planet, the climate, humanity, and all living things. And it must be a part of ensuring a sustainable peace. Thanks.
Thank you. Hint.
Thank you very much and good morning, everybody. Let me start by answering the question of global peace. To me, peace is not only about the absence of war. Also, I agree that we are living the war and witnessing on a daily basis. But it's also the absence of inequality and injustice, which unfortunately, yes, we are living in a polarized world, but we are also witnessing on a daily basis a double standard when it comes to human rights, when it comes to environmental change, climate change, and all these other issues. And we are living also in a very politicized world. Needless to mention examples, I'm sure that you can see it based on the daily lively killing of people in Gaza and how do they suffer on a daily basis, not only killing soldiers and militaries, but also innocent women, children, journalists, patients, doctors, and so on. And this all while the whole world, global community, the global civilization watching such murder without even taking any actions, including the UN Security Council. Now, this is how to do with the global peace. Now, if I may go back a little bit in order to reach also the global peace, to elaborate a little bit about the ethical questions. Indeed, we have to ask ourselves, how do we live? And this is actually Socratic questions. And just to let you know about that, the Prophet Muhammad, when he started as a messenger, he said, I was sent to perfect the good ethics and morals. But when we ask ourselves, how can we do that? What kind of morals do we have to follow? What kind of ethical standards we shall choose? And indeed, is ethics and peace is about choice? Let me share with you this scenario, and I will leave it to you to think about. Let's say my mother is sick, and I cannot afford her medicine. So I walk in the pharmacy, I take some medicine where the managers even will not notice that it's been taken. Am I thief? Am I bad woman? Or am I good daughter and rescuer and hero? Answering the piece itself, it has to do not only with whether it is my choice, my decision is ethical or unethical. It has to do about the surrounding community, the social arrangement, the politics, the regulations, and so on. And then we have to ask ourselves, what's wrong with this community that will leave this patient, this woman who cannot afford her medicine? leave her alone, and then we judge her, or we accuse her that she's a thief or that she's a stealer. So going to the peace, it's all about, we cannot do it individually. It's need a collective action from governments, from international institutions, and so on, until we as individuals. It has a lot to do with rules, regulations, the systems and institutions, the whole system where we are living in. Going back again to the global peace question, yes, I agree with all of you what you have said. We are really living, if I may say, crazy world. It's not only about war, but it's also about different polarization. But probably the two phenomena that you mentioned, and how it's really affecting our lives when it comes to peace, the invention of nuclear weapons and how it's really impacting our lives, and then the interdependence economic ties that will affect our sovereignty as individuals, our sovereignty as countries, because the internal public policies and even the external is not limited anymore within our borders, geographical borders. Because at some point, as a sovereign country, I'm enjoying my sovereignty, but at some point I'll find myself by force, no choice, that I have to accept cooperation with international forces, because I'll find my demand, my whatever, it's been met by external forces. So in this case, we are talking about global peace and how we are supposed to, it's all about international cooperation. I hope I didn't exceed my time. Thank you.
No, it's good. And before getting back and trying to trigger the conversation between the four of you, I would like to start by the word of the Prophet and the idea of perfecting, which is this idea of striving for peace in this particular case, and global peace, which resonate with me an awful lot. And I thank you for bringing this into the conversation. And Miro, you also refer a couple of times to the spiritual part of things in your initial statement, but I also saw a number of complementarities in the things that you said, because, for instance, Mira and Melissa, you referred to balance and harmony, and I was also very struck, or maybe not so struck, by the fact that the four of you in different ways also referred to the planet, climate, environment a number of times, and this is something that struck me. And I also saw, complementarities or points of convergence between what Melissa and you, Corinne, said. Paradoxically, well, bringing up the nuclear threat, there is something which might not be easy to understand for younger generation that have not my age. Paradoxically, this ultra polarized, very nuclear world I grew up with, and some of us grew up with, seem to be working towards peace, but you repeated a number of times that today we live in a more dangerous world, which is fragmented. So I was wondering whether it is the fragmentation, which is a fundamental obstacle to anything like a ideal global peace, and I let you interact as freely as possible. Who would like to start? Corinne.
I don't think it's the fragmentation itself that is the most threatening. I think what is the biggest threat is the lack of ethical leadership, because we have lost, we seem to have lost all sense of decency and humanity. And I think the best way to work towards peace is to regain the sense that we are all working towards, that this is not a zero-sum game. In many ways, the Cold War was a zero-sum game, and yet at some point, the big powers were able to join forces for some bigger causes. And at the moment, I really see, whether it's in the United Nations or other fora, I really see this mentality of zero-sum game really regaining ground. And there is something that Kofi Annan said, which I think really symbolizes what we should be striving for. He said, we must share the pain of all those who suffer and the joy of all those who hope. And I think if we manage to regain this sense of what is it that we are looking for as human beings, then we're back on the right path. So it's not so much the fragmentation, but the fact that we are maybe so much enamored with power that we have lost this sense of profound humanity that we share, all of us.
Okay. First of all, when we talk about how to revive ethics in international relations, it somehow implies thinking, this implies thinking that there was more ethics before. I mean, now, you know, we have 8 billion people around the world and a lot of technology. And we have this impression that we are more developed society, but basically, you know, our civilization is still at a very low moral level. It hasn't made much progress during the history we know, although there are some good things I will mention later. So we must be realistic about that. Just in the last century, we started 2 world wars, followed by the Cold War and several other wars. The last one in the Balkans, in Europe, now we have Ukraine, etc. Not just elsewhere in Africa, Asia, so also in Europe. I mean, it started here, in a civilized Europe, etc. So we must be very careful about ourselves, where moral is still very low. And that's why knowledge is so important, because it is a long run, I would say, project. If you want to have more peace and more ethics, generally, you have to start with education. And the leaders, as you said, ethical leadership is very important, because if you don't have role models among the leaders, then it will not work. On the other hand, we've made some substantial progress in certain ways. For example, human rights, doctrine, practice, the concept of the rule of law, modern democracy. These are some modern achievements which brought about more, I would say, more ethical society, at least to some extent. But of course, we have our ups and downs here. And I agree that we are on the brink of a great war today if we continue like this. So we urgently need to do something, and I agree with everybody here. We are very much in harmony about our arguments, but I fully agree that we need more ethical leadership. That means that especially political leaders should become should be under much more ethical surveillance. There should be much more. I don't know. They should be pushed to be more ethical by the population, by media, by everybody. Otherwise, they will not perform. They will not deliver. And they should. I mean, we should find some new mechanisms how to select our leaders, actually, because, you know, if it's a lot about the personality. Because if you're not ethical, moral in yourself, you will not deliver ethics around you. So it's very difficult. For this reason, we need leaders who are able, ready, and willing. I mean, willing and ready to take any risk to perform ethically, and also to be able to, as I said before, to make a step back sometimes. Because if you just follow your ego, you will not be successful in promoting or fostering ethics. In the last word, and I think that if you behave ethically in politics, you always lose sometimes. You always lose something. You sacrifice something of your own for the public good, for the mankind, but this is the necessary sacrifice. Because it is the nature of politics. If you behave ethically, you lose something, definitely. Sometimes your position, sometimes because you are misunderstood. Okay.
Thank you. In response to that previous comment, I have to say that if you act ethically, you may lose something, but I think in the longer run, you only gain. You gain the respect of others, and most importantly, you gain and keep your self-respect. I agree that ethical leadership is paramount. As the old saying goes, the fish rots from the head. We need ethical leaders, and there's a scarcity of them on the global stage at present. During the Cold War, we saw Gorbachev and Reagan reach an historic agreement to dramatically reduce the number of nuclear weapons from around 70,000 to, like, we've got 12,000 today. And they almost agreed to eliminate them altogether. Well, we need to go further. We need to eliminate them altogether. We have a treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons that provides that pathway. Recent pop culture attention to nuclear weapons through Oppenheimer, the new release of Godzilla, Annie Jacobson's best-selling book, Nuclear War, A Scenario, is giving us the opportunity to reach new audiences with the new understanding that nuclear weapons are a problem, they're not a solution, and that of all the problems out there, the global problems, this one is relatively easy to solve. Humans built nuclear weapons and humans can dismantle them. It just takes political will and leadership. And I wanted to say that the Japanese peacemaker, Daisaku Ikeda, said that nuclear weapons are not the problem per se, nor is it the countries that possess or develop them. The problem that we must confront is the ways of thinking that justify nuclear weapons, the readiness to annihilate others when they're seen as a threat. And so I do think as a species, we have the capacity to choose dialogue over confrontation, the diplomacy over militarization, disarmament over proliferation. We have the capacity as human beings to create a new future that respects the earth and each other. So, I'm very hopeful that we can turn this around, and I'll go into, how we're doing that later.
Thank you. Well, I believe we are all coming from different backgrounds, socially, economically, ethically, ideologically, and so on. So I don't know whether this is the right question, the right argument or no. Accordingly, we can say that when it comes to ethics in international affairs, then do we consider that conflict is a natural phenomenon? Well, yes, because we have differences among us. And yes, because conflict is also natural when it comes to international affairs, because every single country and state society, they have their own, perspective and so on. Perfection doesn't exist. So we need some kind of conflict. But even conflict, war has ethics, limitation of ethics, and has limitations as well. So that's why we need more of ethics in the international affairs, as my colleague has just stressed and mentioned. Again, I would say that we need to think also about what are the main pillars that when it comes to ethics in international affairs. I mean, going literature and when it comes to the development of the literature and the practices even within ethics and international affairs over the last few decades, you can mention that international affairs today in such polarized world is not only about peace and security. Now it has to do a lot with the human rights, a lot with, intervention, within economics, climate change, and other issues, humanitarian, and also refugees, gender equalities, and so on. So having said that, I believe that we need to focus on those pillars. I mean, basically, I'm talking about the protections of the human rights. It is the nation's responsibility to be in charge about protecting the human rights, not only within their own internal borders, but also whenever they interact with external forces. The second thing also, as you mentioned also, the environmental change, the climate change, and how nations are really also responsible about perceiving those climate change issues and reducing their impact and the threats. And this cannot be done individually. It has to be within collective actions with other nations and institutions. just social justice. Nations are expected also to work to creating more just and equality for their people, but also for other nations whenever they have, international cooperation. Also humanitarian intervention, like we've seen it for nowadays within such conflict taken over, and we don't have the choice anymore. So I mean that the occupying countries or those conflict, armed or whatever, they will refuse to cooperate with international. They have to do it without any options. So also nations are expected. In addition, also to the educational, the awareness, the training, more specifically of the potential future leaders. I mean, here we should invest more because they have to be more open to ethics and how to they limit their actions, specifically when it comes to international affairs.
I thank you very much for this. I just wanted to, it's the perfect segue because exactly my second question would have been to give some policy-oriented examples of where do we see or whether we do not see ethics in international affairs. And you have just given 3, 4 examples of that. So I thank you very, very much. I will ask the same question if you can address. So really, what is the place of ethics in international relations, if any? And I already know that for all of you, for all of us, there is a clear place for ethics in international relations, and you have already started addressing this particular question. And so if you just like Hind, could the rest of you expand a little bit on some policy-oriented examples that have to do with your line of business, with your background, with your experiences as policymaker or specialist? Melissa, shall we continue with you? And then Miro?
Thank you. I see ethics in upholding international law rather than some undefined rules-based order. I see ethics in supporting international institutions like the International Court of Justice. I see ethics in promoting collective action for the common good through multilateralism, and I see ethics in ensuring diverse voices are included and heard. As an example, in the case of nuclear weapons, for decades, the narrative around nuclear weapons has been controlled primarily by those who have them, and the message has been nuclear weapons keep us safe and secure. The organisation I work with, change this by focusing the conversation on what would happen if, or more likely when, nuclear weapons are used. And it highlighted the real security impact of nuclear weapons by demonstrating the incontrovertible evidence from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, from the more than 2,000 nuclear weapons tests that have been carried out around the world, that nuclear weapons cause indiscriminate, catastrophic harm to humans and the environment across long periods of time and across vast distances. We brought in the affected community members to tell their stories before the international community. The Hibakusha from Japan and affected communities from around the world. Highlighting the real-world impacts of nuclear weapons shifted the conversation from the theory that these things keep us safe to the reality of the horror that awaits all of us if nuclear weapons are ever used by design or by accident. We informed and empowered a broad range of stakeholders, not only affected communities, but scientists, academics, women, young people, countries from the global south, to stand up and demand a policy shift. And that led to the negotiation and adoption of the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in 2017, with the support of 122 countries. Now, this is an important addition to international law and to multilateralism at a time when these are increasingly under threat. It is the first time that nuclear weapons have been prohibited under international law. It is the only treaty that provides for victim assistance and environmental remediation. So it's not only a disarmament treaty, but it is a human rights treaty, an environment treaty, and a feminist treaty. The treaty acknowledges the disproportionate harm on women and girls from nuclear weapons and on Indigenous peoples. It is democratising nuclear weapons debate by taking the debate out of the hands of the nuclear armed states, including the Permanent Five in the Security Council, and bringing it to the General Assembly where every country has an equal vote. And the process is participatory and inclusive, and the voices of affected communities are centred. The voices of Indigenous people are centred. So it is, I think, the embodiment of what ethical leadership looks like at the global level.
Thank you. Nero?
So I will not repeat what we've just heard. I think that there is a lot of ethics in the world, in international relations as well. So we must not be too pessimistic about that, because you know, the quantity of ethics in the world is still bigger than the evil part, you know. It's always like this, but we mostly see the bad things, you know. We comment them, the media, of course, inform us about them, and then we get this impression, but we must not be too pessimistic. On the other hand, of course, there is a lot of space to improve, for improvement. And we were talking about ethical leadership, of course, yes. But, you know, we must not forget about the people as such, about us, because there can be no ethical leadership if there is no corresponding effect on the side of the population. So if the people don't understand, if they don't know what is ethical, if they are not willing to adapt to ethical ideas, and so the leaders are without any power to do this. Now, if you are a dictator, you can do many ethical things, but usually dictators don't. I mean, but if you are a democratic leader, you need support. You need support by your citizens, and they will not give you support if you try to be very ethical, because it will go to the extent of their, let's say, living standard. And so, for example, you know, all our endeavors for against gas emissions, against pollution, against climate change, I mean, to do something, it's very difficult. If you make some radical ethical decisions, you will not be understood. It will not be well accepted by the population. You will lose people will simply lose trust in the government. You will lose your position. You will not be able to continue with your project. So this is a very tangible relationship, especially in democracies. But of course, as I said, it had been said, any such attempt which brings some certain sacrifice on the part of the politicians, leaders, will bring very good things, very beneficial things in the long run. So it pays off, it is important, and it is crucial for the survival of the mankind. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Corinne.
First of all, I just want to say that Miroslav has pointed something very important about the dialectic relationship between ethical leaders and their people, and the fact that people must be encouraged, of course, and must be given the means to select ethical leaders, but they must also hold their leaders accountable. And it's really difficult sometimes, but it's really the crux of this relationship. It's not only about heroes who will lead us in an ethical way. It's really our responsibility as individuals as well to make sure we have the right leaders. But I want to give 3 policy oriented examples of ethics in international relations. I think one is about manifesting solidarity in international relations. And I want to contrast what happens with HIV/AIDS 30 years ago and what happened with COVID just a few years ago. And the fact that, and I'm sorry if I always come back to Kofi Annan because that's part of my job. I mean, but
absolutely okay.
You know what Kofi Annan did with with setting up the Global Fund, which is based here, of course, in Geneva, on HIV, AIDS, and TB and malaria, was really making sure that everyone was collectively responsible for providing access to antiretroviral medicine to the millions of people in Africa who were dying from HIV/AIDS. And he was able to bring people around the table, the big pharma, the community leaders, the political leaders, in a way that nobody had before. And then you contrast this with the difficulties that WHO is having in negotiating a pandemic treaty today. It's, you know, they have to extend their negotiations month after month, year after. They're not getting there. There's not this sense of solidarity. So this is it can be done. But I'm not saying this to bring people's morale down. I'm just citing actually positive examples. It can be done. The second is about caring, so not being indifferent. Again, what is shocking, I find today, someone pointed out recently that what happened in Darfur 20 years ago and what happened in Darfur today, more people are dying in Darfur today than 20 years ago. I went to Darfur with Kofi Annan 20 years ago, but more people are dying today. Who cares? Who is talking about it? That, you know, the George Clooney was like all over Darfur and this, we must do this. Who is talking about Darfur today? Nobody's talking about it. More people are suffering. So you have to have a groundswell of caring, you know, and make sure we don't fall into indifference. And the third, and in the case of Darfur, again, I mean, you know, obviously things fell apart later, but the international community came together. There was a peacekeeping operation and so on. And the third one is really about bringing back optimism, precisely. We need to have this sense that we can do things together, because our leaders at the moment are sort of depicting the inevitability of war. You know, we're just like on a conveyor belt and there's nothing we can do about we can't fall off it. We're walking towards war and there's nothing we, you know, so we have because it's inevitable, we have to prepare. So we have the highest military spending ever, you know, 9th consecutive year of increase in military spending, according to the Stockholm Institute of International Peace Research Institute. But we have to bring back this sense that we can work together. We have to show that peace actually works. There's a lot of excellent work being done at ground level by different organizations, many of which are based here in Geneva, to build peace on the ground. So all this, but nobody is looking at that. And by the way, states are completely underinvesting. I mean, the funding for peace work has decreased tremendously. So we have to bring back this sense that we can make peace work. You know, we have fantastic example in the past of, you know, the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, was recently mentioning how elated he felt when he was then a Portuguese official when Timor-Leste became independent. And I went to Dili 20 years ago at the time of the UN intervention there, and there was this sense of optimism that things were going in the right direction. So solidarity, caring, and optimism, I think, is how we bring ethics back into international relations.
Solidarity, caring, optimism. This is also something that I heard in different ways in the words of all of you. I'm also struck by the fact that the four of you gave positive examples, which is something that I have a hard time persuading my students to see, because, and I fight every day, probably like the rest of you, I fight against this idea of inevitability that you mentioned, which is highly problematic, which I start seeing how it could be related to ethics. Another thing, and I starting, you know, taking away points that could be useful in order to make sense of this panel and of this first time together this morning, is also the role of education, and the idea that is not a God-given leader that is going to, make sure that things will not be inevitable. But it's and Miro, you repeated a number of times the role of education, and this is probably the only way in which a given population that is exposed to ethical principles will understand how an ethical leader behaves or does not behave, and will take decisions. So I hear you on these points. I also understood that there are plenty of areas in which, and Melissa, you gave a few examples of that, ethics is nowhere to be seen at the international level. And this remains probably the part of the work that need to be done. I mean, you expanding on the nuclear example, that is, of course, something that you know extremely well. And so maybe this is also something that we could reflect on. The third question that I really wanted to ask you, which is a difficult one, and I realize that it's a bit unfair for me to ask this question to all of you, and I honestly admit that I don't have an answer to it, is whose ethics? Corinne, would you like to start? I don't want to put anybody on the spot.
I do. Thank you. No, I'm very happy to start, because there is a whole school of thought that, of course, the current international order is based on a very liberal, Western-dominated ideology, and I really want to push back strongly against this, because the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Charter of the UN, were drafted jointly by lots of people, including amazing women from the global South. So it's not a sort of European male idea of things. There were amazing women from the global South that made sure that important things were included in this document. So of course, there is a total and unethical balance of power in the United Nations that derives from its charter and the veto power in the Security Council. But however, I think when I really challenge anybody to read the Universal Declaration of Human Rights or to read the Charter of the UN and to say, these are not my ethics, really. Because it's, the human being wants peace. The human being wants good. The human being is not intrinsically violent. I mean, the society constructs violence, but it's not. So I really think we have a multilateral system that needs to evolve because of the imbalance of power, because a lot of young people don't feel represented by international organizations today, and rightly so. However, the fundamental ethical ideology, if you want, underneath it, which is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in particular, I think belongs to everyone, and everyone needs to own it. So that I think there are very cynical people who are trying to push against these. And we see, for instance, there are norms that have been developed also over the 60, now nearly 80 years of UN, norms for gender equality, for instance, for women's empowerment, that some countries are very cynically pushing back against today, saying these are not this is not my view of the world. Why should it be imposed on me? But I think this is a very cynical thing from some leaders, definitely not from women in the countries that they represent. So
that's a very good starting point, but we can continue later on. Miro?
Well, I fully agree that there are certain universal principles which should be followed by the whole world, by the whole humanity. But of course, the cultural relativism is a reality we're faced with. So no matter how we believe in this, what you've just said, human rights, gender equality, non-discrimination, etc., there will always be nations and religious communities and people who will not be, let's say, in compliance with this, or will be very against it. And now, for example, when we speak about gender equality, about legal equality in general, you have this concept in some religious, let's say, communities or countries of complementarity. Men and women should be in a complementary relation, which doesn't require an equal treatment for both, but this complementarity brings some harmony. If everybody does its job, then everything is okay, because we are helping each other, we are solidary, we are, humane, etc. But it doesn't work in practice. So we've learned from history, it doesn't work. So that's why I'm a very strong defender and staunch supporter of human rights. Because this is the civilizational achievement, including gender equality, non-discrimination of all kinds, because the history has proven that people always distort ethics and good ideas, noble ideas. And this is why I fully agree that we have reached certain international standards, especially within the international treaties and some other, for example, 2030 agenda is kind of a global agreement we should stick to. Of course, it is unrealistic. Of course, there is a big problem with the implementation. We heard it yesterday. But still, the goals there are noble, are good, are positive, ethically positive. So we have things defined. So now we have to deliver, and this is the problem, because the gap between the ideal and practice has always been within the human beings very strong. So I would finally probably like also to say that what we really need to learn, besides apart to all this we said, is how to respect everything around us, people, animals, the rest of the nature, and the world as such. Because if we start with this respect, which implies some humbleness, implies some, let's say, holistic approach to the world, more sensitive, more respectable, then we will give enough space to start with, let's say, the revival of ethics. And I've seen whenever there was a respect between the leaders of the country I met, when we were discussing the respectful level, or let's say, the results were much better. And I think that we should all, especially the leaders, but all the people as well, learn how to respect this world and everything, because it gives us what we are. It enables us as such. So this is so important and this should be one of the universal approaches we could all learn, no matter what, I mean, apart from different backgrounds, to be more respectful.
Okay, thank you. Please.
Just to come back to Corinne's mention of Kofi Annan, in prior time in my life, I worked with the United Nations for a number of years under Kofi Annan, and he was, the perfect example of, epitomizing caring, compassion, solidarity, and optimism. And in terms of optimism, there's an old saying that says, whether you think you can or you can't, you're right. And so I think it is really important to push back against the inevitability of war, against the inevitability of the end of the world, and so on. Instead, we can imagine a different future and put that into action. And indeed, if we are to survive as a species and as a planet, we cannot wait around for politicians to make the necessary policy shifts on the environment and in relation to nuclear weapons. We have to take the lead, and we're seeing increasingly young people standing up, whether it's climate rallies, Extinction Rebellion, and increasingly in terms of the nuclear weapons abolition movement. They're seeing the intergenerational injustice, both on the environment crisis and nuclear weapons. Almost all of you, I'm sure, will have heard of Margaret Mead, anthropologist's famous quote, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." And civil society has had a long history of driving meaningful change. And I think ICANN stands as a good example. ICANN began in Melbourne, Australia in 2007 by a small group of people sitting around a kitchen table asking themselves, what could they do to get rid of these weapons of mass destruction, nuclear weapons, given that the nuclear-armed states were refusing to disarm in accordance with their legal obligations under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And they decided to start a campaign based on the earlier successful campaigns against landmines and cluster munitions, whereby you prohibit the weapons and then they become morally and legally unacceptable to use. You're changing the norms. And so they did that. In 2007, they started this campaign. Within 10 years, the organisation was based in Geneva. It had hundreds of partner organisations around the world, and it had won the Nobel Peace Prize for its work in highlighting the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons and helping to get a new UN treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons adopted. So I think that's a great example. The other thing I wanted to say in terms of whose ethics, it's all of ours. It's all of us. It's up to all of us. ICANN is seeking to break down the silos where nuclear weapons only get talked about in security and disarmament fora, and usually only by white, male, so-called experts. When nuclear weapons can destroy everything and everyone we love at any moment, we all have a stake in this issue, and we all have the right to a voice on this issue. Nuclear weapons are not separate from other global issues. They are deeply interconnected. They're connected to human rights. What could be a greater violation of the right to life, the right to health, the right to a clean environment? They're deeply connected to health. I had a meeting with Dr. Tedros, the head of the World Health Organization, recently, who very quickly agreed that nuclear risks are health risks, that when there's a nuclear detonation, there can be no humanitarian or health response because health workers are mostly dead or injured, infrastructure is all destroyed, and plus the high degree of radiation in the air. So you're on your own in terms of a nuclear strike. And where there is something that you cannot respond to, and this is why the International Committee of the Red Cross has always opposed nuclear weapons. When there's something you can't respond to, you have to prevent. And the only way to prevent this is the total elimination of nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons are also an environmental issue. The latest science in 2022 in the Nature Food Journal, scientists have concluded that even a limited nuclear war using only a fraction of the world's nuclear arsenal would not only kill millions of people outright, but it would cause global climate disruption from the soot being ejected into the stratosphere and blocking out sunlight, leading to agricultural collapse and the death by starvation of more than 2 billion people in a nuclear winter within 2 years. A major nuclear war would mean the end of human civilization and most other life forms. So this is an issue it's very deeply a personal issue for all of us. And it is an issue for leadership at every level. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, David, it's not whose ethics a question, simply because we are all coming from different perspectives, socially, religious, culture, and so on. You have your own ethics, I have my own ethics. And what is ethical to you might be unethical to me. And even for myself, what I used to believe it used to be ethics like a few years ago, it might be unethical today. So it has so many criteria. That's why we cannot say that there is one ethical standard we have to follow. But it's all about, if you have your ethics, I have to accept it and respect it. And the same verse that you have to accept my ethics and respect it. So it's all about respecting each other ethics because we are humans. But the good news is that we are living in a polarized world, but we have at least some, if I may call it, international efforts and achievements that are really remarkable when it comes to the work they've done, how to create and to base the essential ethics, if I may call it, like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, because we are all talking about the human rights as the basic of such ethics. In addition, we have a lot of multilateralism treaties and declaration that been also including and engage in the ethics. So it's not about whose ethic we are supposed to follow, because we have our, our own differences, but it's all about respect and about accepting these ethics. But probably the one point also is that I would like to mention is that having such multilateralism and having such, international laws, I think it's time to reinforce those multilateralism, to bring back the power for them. We know, going through, when we are talking about this question, we can see some critiques, how is the Security Council, how is multilateralism is polarized, or so, with international, even like International Criminal Court and so on. But they've been established for the sake of mediating conflict, and they've been established for the sake of having positive ethics in a way that it will not be forced for us because we like it or we don't like it. It will be forced on us because we have to follow this minimum standard of ethics. And the last word I would like to say is youth, you are the architects of the future. You are the potential of not only changing the world, but also forcing ethics. You have to follow your ethics without any questions, but you have also to fight, as we've been saying, to fight strongly and to struggle for having the minimum base of your ethics, so that definitely the politicians will be used. But also we have the other sectors of ethics when it comes to climate change, environment, stability, sustainability, and other human rights aspects.
Thank you very much. You can correct me if I'm wrong. I've got the impression that the four of you in different ways believe that there is at least a minimum common denominator, which might not be believing in a single form of ethics, but there is something that we share, our common humanity. You can call it in different ways, and if there is a mechanism that triggers and makes sure that this principle thrives, and this is a word that many of you used multiple times, that's respect. So it's based on this very simple mechanism that this common ground whose ethics in the end might be implemented. The second thing that I noticed, and again, feel free to correct me, and maybe I got it very, very wrong. None of you is a revolutionary. The four of you are reformists. Basically, you are telling us we do have a certain number of tools, certainly not perfect. They exist under different names. One is multilateralism, which is flawed, which doesn't necessarily work, but it's there as a good principle that we should cherish and nurture in different ways. The tools exist. The Human Rights Declaration might not be perfect, but it indicates, it paves the way in a way or in another. And so there are a number of things that are already in place. The International Criminal Court and other treaties, institutions, and so on and so forth. Am I wrong? No. Okay, so I got this right, and this is probably yet another takeaway point that I'd like the audience to bear in mind. And now, as promised, we are 11 minutes away from the end of our session. And in a very Swiss way, I respect the allotted time, and I turn to you We are going to open up the floor for questions. You've received them, and
Yes.
please shoot them one after the other.
Okay, I will do my best. I'm also trying to combine several questions because we've got over a dozen questions for less than a dozen minutes. So we will do our best. First question, I saw a lot of discussion here from participants about the virtual world, AI and polarization. And so thinking about how does polarization kind of manifest right now, and how is it different online versus in the physical world, and how do they impact each other, with an asterisk that this could be a positive or negative impact. But this was one key question. And a second one I'll put in that maybe kind of connects to that and what everyone was last talking about as well, was about conflict, and how in a way conflict or even disagreement is something that's inherent when you have a diverse group of people, because you have different definitions, different values. And so how do you think about the perception of conflict in how you define conflict and disagreement? How do you use this to build peace and harmony? How do you deal when people agree to disagree, when there are different ethics? How do you move forward? And if the answer is respect, please describe it, how to actually go through with that. And especially if an ethics is impeding on, if one person's value is impeding on someone else's, which is not an easy question. So thanks everybody. So I'll stop there for now and come back if we have time. Thanks.
Floor is open, and here I don't indicate any of you that wants to start. Miro, please. Brave.
Just came to my mind one thought about this technology, artificial intelligence, digitalization. As long as all this technology, including artificial intelligence, the present point of development, is our tools, it will just multiply our ethical or unethical action.
Behaviors.
I mean, whatever we do, it will just multiply. So it will be used in military purposes, in let's say in the health system to save people's lives, etc. So technology is just a tool in this sense. But if the AI goes beyond that, if it really becomes autonomous in a way, the real AI, then we are in a very great danger. Maybe the greatest, even the biggest danger so far, bigger maybe than totalitarian regimes or maybe even nuclear weapons, because we will not be able to rule over us anymore. We will just be left to the mercy of machines or this intelligence behind them. So this is a very big challenge. And I see that nowadays we are not able to follow all these developments, progress, we say progress, okay, it's basically progress, technical progress, by ethical means. We are lagging behind. It happens so fast that we must really do our best to at least follow this, to prevent, let's say, the very best scenarios.
Yeah.
So, stop here, not enough.
Sure.
If I may add, indeed, AI, it's been created, developed by humans. And hence, it can bring us back to the questions about what kind of ethical we have to use, what kind of ethics we have to follow, or to be standard. The good news is, I'm very quite sure about this, is that the ITU is really working right now on having something which they call it ethical standards for AI. It's a very difficult mission, by the way, because what is ethical when it comes to AI, like in the Asian countries, differs from African, European, and so on. And the same thing, if I'm not mistaken, there is also a document called AI Declaration Standard Ethical something developed by the European Council. I looked at it and it's really looked to be very good. I mean, however we put of standards for AI, we cannot control it because it's developed by a human. So it depends again to the ethics of the humans.
There you go. Yes. Yes, please.
Going to the question about AI and its impact, I think obviously we're seeing that there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation going on, manipulation of social media, and this can obviously exacerbate divisions, increase distrust in international institutions, and it will distort perceptions of global issues. In terms of the impact in relation to nuclear weapons, it increases the danger. I mean, nuclear weapons are already like an existential risk, but artificial intelligence applied to nuclear weapons, which we're now seeing increasingly happen in the military around the world, that is increasing the speed of warfare and decreasing the time for nuclear decision making, and that is very, very dangerous. It also increases the chances for accidents and miscalculations, and increases the risk of cyber attacks, which I think no person, country, or organisation has a foolproof way against. In terms of perception of conflict, I think there must always be, whatever perception one has, there must always be a willingness to talk and to listen. And I think it's insane that there is no significant discussions around a peace agreement for Ukraine. In the meantime, thousands of people are dying every day because there's no peace talks, and I don't understand why that's not happening. Yeah, so dialogue, diplomacy, I think they are tools that we have available to us that we can choose to engage with, and I need to see more of that.
Absolutely.
Well, obviously, I think I can only agree with this, and I'd like, because a lot of has already been said about AI, but I'd like to come back to this issue of conflict. I think that most conflict differences are natural and not necessarily bad. They are, what is bad is the slide towards violence, of course. So they're rarely, some of the big violent conflicts we see are rarely about values. They are mostly about interests. So I think the ability of the international community to provide trusted, neutral mediators that can provide some kind of arbitrage among these interests is what is lacking at the moment. But we know how it's done. It's been done many times before. We know how it's done, and as awful as the Gaza conflict is, at least there is an attempt to negotiate, which there isn't in Ukraine, as you said. So we know how it's done. It's just a matter of investing sufficiently in those processes that have shown to work time and time again. There must be an understanding in a parties to a conflict that they have an interest in peace. Kofi Annan walked away from his role as special envoy on Syria, and he said the parties are not interested in peace. I cannot want peace more than the parties. So there is a whole machinery. There are experts, many of them based here in Geneva, in mediation and so on. It can happen, but there has to be a willingness of the countries and people involved to want peace. But just one very quick point about revolution. As a French citizen, I have a complex relationship with revolutions, but I think we've come to the point, yes, we have lots of tools, we have mechanisms that work. They have ground to a halt. However, there is a paralysis of the multilateral system. We should keep it, we should not jeopardize it, but we do need a slight revolution in the multilateral system. We need profound changes. We need profound changes. Reform, will not cut it at this stage.
Right. Okay, I think in the interest of time, we're going to stop here. Let me wrap up, first of all, by thanking the four of you for your inputs, your insights, your reflections, and what you brought to the table and for our reflections. I would like to say, as a teacher of this institution where we're holding this, this gathering, that we reintroduced philosophy and ethics back in 2020, which had disappeared at the end of the Cold War, to go back to this theme, for a number of years. And this is our own personal or collective endeavor to make sure that ethics are there, present, and we keep educating a younger generation of future policymakers, and that you pointed to them in before, so that this is going to stay as present as possible and is as a compass in their hands when they will leave the institute. This is how we very modestly contribute to the kind of conversations that we had this morning. And the last word that I would like to add is something that I take away from your interventions this morning, which is a word of hope, positive, moderate optimism, and fight against this idea of ineluctable end of the story. So once again, I would like to thank you all very, very much, and thank the audience. Thank you.